Strong on this whole issue of free speech, in particular, free speech outside America, such as here. We want here on JD's radar. Here he is talking the other day.
Yes, ma'am.
In his remarks at the Munich Security Conference, Vice President Vance condemned free speech violations in the UK, particularly. Could you respond? What is your message?
I have an idea. We have the man right here. Come on. Let's go, JD. We're putting you on stage.
Great. Yeah, look, I said what I said, which is that we do have, of course, a special relationship with our friends in the UK and also with some of our European allies, but we also know that there have been infringements on free speech that actually affect not just the British, of course, what the British do in their own country is up to them, but also affect American technology companies and by extension,
Britain has just faced one of the most humiliating diplomatic moments in recent memory. The United States, our closest ally, has released an official government report branding Britain as authoritarian. Not just troubled, not simply concerning, authoritarian. And the sting lies in the timing. This revelation came while America's incoming Vice President JD Vance was staying as a guest in the Foreign Secretary's home. It was the political equivalent of inviting your best friend over for dinner, only for them to publicly shame you in front of the entire neighborhood before dessert was even served. British politics like this one. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Dark Britain. Believe it or not, over 98% of viewers watch our content without hitting the follow button. Subscribing is completely free. Washington didn't soften its criticism. It made it official in a human rights report accessible to every government, journalist, and watchdog across the globe. In other words, they didn't whisper their concerns. They broadcast Britain's failures on the world stage.
got a little too comfortable with censoring rather than engaging with a diverse array of opinions. So that's been my view. Obviously, I've raised some criticism and concerns about our friends on this side of the Atlantic. But the thing that I'd say to the people of England or to anybody else, to David, is many of the things that I worry most about were happening in the United States from 2020 to 2024. I just don't want other countries to follow us down what I think was a very dark path.
This wasn't a careless jab. It was a calculated strike aimed at the very heart of Britain's democratic reputation. While Vance was sipping tea in the English countryside, his government was issuing a warning that Britain's democratic institutions are slipping into dangerous territory. The real question is what pushed America to turn on Britain so openly. The report makes it clear the concern is free speech. Washington accused Starr's government of placing serious restrictions on expression in record time. And the very first example they gave was the government's heavy-handed response to the Southport riots. Instead of allowing open debate, Starr's team leaned on social media companies, including American platforms, to remove posts they claimed were spreading misinformation. For the United States, this was a red line. They saw it as state-backed censorship, the very kind of behavior Britain once condemned in other countries. And the word Washington used to describe it was grievous, a signal that allies now believe Britain has moved beyond making mistakes and has stepped into systemic abuse.
Talking about these issues, no matter who's in the room, but the question begs, Brad, is he right?
I think he's absolutely right about the United Kingdom and their sad decline in freedom of speech and freedom of press. I mean, you have thousands of people who've been arrested over the years because of things they posted on social media. That is not a free country. That is a kind of modern dystopia, an authoritarian state where the government can roll up with the authorities to come get you because they don't like what you have to say. It is sad to see that happen to one of our greatest allies, a beautiful nation with a long history and legacy as a beacon of freedom in the West. And I also appreciate JD Vance calling them out for it. But honestly, it will have to come from within. Their own citizens will have to stop standing for it, stop standing for the censorship, stop standing for the overreach, for the absurd policing. You see video after video where the police roll up on somebody for a crude joke that they posted online or for asking someone, why don't you speak English, or any other sort of thing that's just fundamentally not a...
But the criticism didn't stop there. America also highlighted new public space protection orders that allow police to criminalize even silent prayer in certain areas. Imagine being fined or even arrested for simply standing quietly with your own thoughts in the wrong place. The symbolism was chilling enough that Washington called it a step toward policing belief itself. Then came the Online Safety Act, a law requiring adults to prove their age before accessing websites, while also giving the government potential access to encrypted messages. In practice, that means two things. Your identity is no longer private, online, and your personal conversations could be read by the state. It's a system that feels less like British democracy and more like a scene taken straight from George Orwell's imagination. If censorship had already raised alarms in Washington, the next issue pushed them into outright condemnation: Britain's failure to confront its rising wave of anti-Semitism. Since late 2023, Jewish communities across the country have faced levels of hostility not seen in decades, and the examples listed in the report are deeply disturbing. In London, staff at a kosher shop were forced to fight off an attacker wielding a knife in what could have easily turned into a fatal assault. In Yorkshire, a university chaplain and his family had to abandon their home after receiving death threats simply because of his past service in the Israeli Defense Forces. These are not abstract statistics. These are ordinary families living in fear, targeted for their faith. For the United States, a nation struggling with its own hate crime crisis, singling out Britain's failures in an official report is no small matter. It signals that Washington views this not just as a domestic challenge for Britain, but as a national security and human rights issue with global consequences. And then came the twist. While enjoying the hospitality of his British hosts, JD Vance delivered what can only be described as a diplomatic intervention. He warned that America had made catastrophic mistakes on free speech between 2020 and 2024, and that Britain was now repeating those same mistakes on an even greater scale. It was as if a guest at your dinner table leaned over and quietly told you that you were repeating their worst errors, all while still helping themselves to your food.
Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time. Well, no, I mean, certainly we wouldn't want to reach across US citizens, and we don't, and that's absolutely right. But in relation to free speech in the UK, I'm very proud of our history there.
Faced with this storm of criticism, one would expect the British Prime Minister to respond with authority and conviction.
Instead,
Starmer gave a performance so weak it was almost embarrassing.
When asked
about free speech, his answer didn't sound like a leader defending one of the most basic rights.
It sounded more like a nervous student stumbling through an oral exam. At a time when Britain needed strength, he projected doubt. Meanwhile, the American report pulled no punches.
It didn't hide behind polite language or vague hints.
It spelled out in direct terms that Britain now suffers from severe restrictions on freedom of expression and that the government has been inconsistent in holding officials accountable for abuses. In diplomacy, where even insults are usually wrapped in politeness, such blunt words are explosive. The message behind them is simple. Washington believes Britain no longer knows where it stands, or worse, that it no longer cares.
Opposed to lost, but we got along with them also. We have a very good relationship with.
The historical irony could not be sharper. Here is a nation that once pioneered parliamentary democracy, that gave the world the Magna Carta and inspired constitutions across continents, now being told by its closest ally that it has abandoned its own traditions. The very land that once stood as a fortress of liberty, guiding others in their fight for freedom, is now being warned that it has strayed from the very ideals it once exported. Britain used to take pride in exporting liberty, in shaping representative government and civil rights for the world to follow. Yet today, it is no longer praised as a model. It is being scolded as a warning. The tables have turned, and the humiliation is undeniable. It feels as if the teacher of democracy has been dragged into detention by its own students. This is not being brushed aside as some minor embarrassment that will vanish with tomorrow's headlines. It is being treated as a genuine diplomatic crisis. Washington's message is blunt. Britain has crossed the line. And if it continues down this path, it risks losing not just prestige but trust. Even among its oldest allies, patience is running thin. For decades, the special relationship was held up as unbreakable, rooted in shared history and shared values. But now, for the first time in living memory, those values are being openly questioned. When America signals that your democratic credibility is in doubt, the rest of the world pays attention. And once that doubt spreads, it rarely fades away. The bigger picture makes this warning even harsher. Britain, once the example others tried to follow, is now being used as the cautionary tale. What was once the gold standard of democracy is now paraded as a lesson in decline. America's message wasn't aimed only at Britain. It was a signal broadcast to the international community. If Washington is willing to brand Britain authoritarian in an official report, how long before Europe, the Commonwealth, or other allies begin echoing the same judgment? The wording was chosen carefully, but its impact is devastating. Britain is no longer seen as a steady hand of democracy, but as a state drifting dangerously away from its principles. And here lies the true danger. Once a nation is branded authoritarian, the damage is extremely hard to reverse. Trust starts to crumble quietly but quickly. Trade talks get tougher. Intelligence sharing slows down. Military cooperation is questioned. Diplomatic negotiations grow colder. Allies begin to wonder whether Britain is still the partner they believed in, or whether it has become unpredictable, maybe even untrustworthy. This erosion doesn't come with loud explosions. It is slow, quiet, and corrosive. But once it starts, it rarely stops. The longer Britain refuses to change course, the closer it drifts toward real isolation. And perhaps the most unsettling truth is this: this may only be the beginning. If the government keeps pushing surveillance laws, restricting speech, and applying hate crime enforcement selectively, then reports like this will not stop. They will multiply. Each one will weigh heavier than the last. Today it is America raising the alarm. Tomorrow it could be Brussels, Ottawa, Canberra, or Tokyo. And once the chorus of allies grows louder, it becomes impossible to silence. The question now facing every citizen is brutally simple. Are we seeing just a rough chapter in Britain's democratic story, or are we watching the dismantling of democratic Britain in real time? For now, people can still debate, protest, and question. But even that cannot be taken for granted. Rights once surrendered are rarely returned without a fight. And history shows us that once a government feels comfortable silencing voices, it rarely stops at the first step. That is the heart of the crisis. Britain, once the torchbearer of democracy, is now the warning sign. America is no longer praising us. It is warning the world about us. That shift, from admiration to alarm, should wake every citizen. Because if this doesn't, what will? At what point does silence become complicity? At what point do citizens realize that their inheritance, the freedom generations fought and died for, is being spent like spare change in the pockets of careless leaders? So here is the real question. Have we already crossed into authoritarianism? Or is this just turbulence in the story of democracy? Is this a wake-up call, or the final warning before freedom slips quietly away? History will decide, but only if people today are willing to ask and act. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. This debate is no longer theoretical. It is happening right now in full view of the world. And while we still have the chance to speak freely, your voice matters more than ever. The clock is ticking, and the question is no longer whether Britain's democratic image is damaged. The question is whether it can still be saved. If you want to stay updated as this story unfolds, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because from here on out, every development matters, and we'll be covering every